Have you ever wondered why things have prices? Why does a loaf of bread cost a few dollars, but a car can cost tens of thousands? Prices aren't just numbers, they're signals. They tell us what's scarce, what's valuable, and where resources should go. Without prices, society is blind. So what do prices really do? They're not just random numbers, they're the result of buyers and sellers making deals. Let's look at how that actually works. What prices actually do. Prices are not arbitrary, they emerge from voluntary exchange. Prices come about when buyers and sellers engage in business. The terms of engagement set the prices according to how much both parties agree something is worth to them. This price is more than a tag, it's information. It tells producers what to make, in what quantities, and when to stop. It tells consumers what's abundant, what's scarce, and what's worth their money. Prices align millions of individual plans without a central authority. Say you want to go to the store. You could walk, drive a car, or, even if it sounds absurd, fly a helicopter. Which mode of transport would you choose? You're probably most likely to choose walking or driving. But why does the helicopter sound ridiculous? Because it's incredibly expensive. But if there were no price tags, if we didn't know the costs, how would we judge what's expensive and what's not? Prices solve this instantly. They condense millions of information like production costs, consumer preference, available resources, and opportunity costs into a single number. That number doesn't tell you everything, but it tells you enough to act. Let's take the cost of bread for an example. The price of a loaf reflects not just the cost of flour, water, yeast, but the wages of the truck driver who delivered it, the rent of the bakery, the demand for sandwiches in your neighborhood, even the cost of diesel in the Ukraine. Every link in the chain adds a signal. The final price acts like a summary of the world economy, compressed into a simple tag. Now think like a baker. If for some reason, say a war or a drought, the price of wheat rises, your cost will go up. That signals the scarcity of the wheat, and you and every other baker receive this information at the same time. Some might raise their prices, others might switch to different products. Consumers, seeing the higher price, might cut back or switch to alternatives. The economy adapts in real time. No one had to issue a memo, no one had to hold a meeting, the signal passed through the price system. This is what Friedrich Hayek in his 1945 essay, The Use of Knowledge in Society, called a marvel. A system that coordinates the dispersed knowledge of billions of people without a central brain. The market, through prices, uses this information no single person or committee could ever grasp. It's decentralized intelligence at work. And this process isn't static. Prices change all the time. New preferences emerge, supply chains shift, innovations reduce costs, crises raise them. Prices are a living language. Every price movement reflects a change in the real world. For example, if consumers suddenly want more electric cars, the price of lithium might go up. This rise encourages mining companies to extract more lithium. It pushes entrepreneurs to invest in alternatives. It nudges consumers to consider hybrids or public transportation. Again, no orders were given, just signals received and acted upon. Prices also tell us when to stop. If there's too much of something, its price drops. That falling price tells producers you're making too many, stop, reallocate your resources. Do something else. The signal is brutal, but efficient. It's the same with success. High prices and profits tell entrepreneurs, you're solving a real problem, keep going, scale up, hire people, expand. And because resources are scarce, prices help us use them wisely. You can't have everything. Society can't have everything. We must choose. Prices show the trade-offs. If you want more housing in city centers, that means there would be less land for parks. If you want cheaper flights, that would result in burning more jet fuel. If you want fresh strawberries in winter, that would mean greenhouses, heating, and long-distance transport. Prices don't make these choices for us, but they make the cost visible. Even when you don't understand the full story behind a price, you're still reacting to it. You don't need to know why avocados are expensive this week. You just see the number and decide. That's the genius. You act rationally with incomplete information because the price gives you just enough. This applies to producers too. A farmer doesn't need to know the global demand for soybeans. He watches the prices and acts. If the price rises, he plants more. If the price drops, he switches crops. His decisions reflect real global shifts, even if he's never read a trade report. In this way, prices align with incentives. Buyers act on their own interest. Sellers do too. But the result is mutual benefit and overall coordination. Everyone's partial knowledge is stitched together by the market. That's why Ludwig von Mises called the price system the foundation of economic calculation. He argued that without prices, rational production becomes impossible. You can't compare options, you can't allocate capital, you can't distinguish between gain and loss. You're just flying blind. This is also why entrepreneurs and investors depend on prices to guide their choices. Should we build this bridge or that factory? Should we hire this engineer or buy this robot? Prices help us make this decision. They tell us not just what we can do, but what we should do with our limited resources. In short, prices are the backbone of modern civilization. They let strangers cooperate, they let preferences emerge, and they turn scarcity into order. Let's not take them for granted. Without prices, the entire system begins to break down. Take away the silent signal, and suddenly, there's no clear way to decide. What happens without prices? Now imagine you remove this system. No more prices. The government owns everything. Who decides what gets made? Who gets what? This isn't just a thought experiment. It was a real policy implemented by the Soviet Union from 1918 to 1921 called War Communism. The Bolsheviks abolished markets and banned private trade. Prices were declared irrelevant and goods were requisitioned and centrally distributed. As a result, industrial output fell to about 20% of its pre-war level. Agriculture collapsed and millions of people starved. Entire cities were depopulated. Economic activity didn't slow, it disintegrated. This is because once prices vanish, so does the ability to make rational decisions. Think about it. If you run a steel factory, how do you decide whether to make rails or machine parts? In a market, you choose the price. In a centrally planned economy, you get orders. But those orders are arbitrary. They don't reflect scarcity or demand. They reflect the whim of bureaucrats. And bureaucrats, even with the best intentions, are flying blind. They don't know which inputs are most urgent. They don't know what consumers want. They don't know the opportunity cost of their choice. Without prices, there's no feedback, no way to know if they're helping or wasting. That's exactly what happened. Factories produced the wrong things in the wrong quantities. Trains ran half empty in some regions and were overburdened in others. Shoes were made in sizes nobody wore. Resources piled up in warehouses because no one knew where to send them. Even worse, there was no way to measure success. If a plant met its quota, was that good? Did the output have value? Were the materials used efficiently? No one could say. Without prices, there are no profits, no losses, no cost-benefit comparisons. It's not just inefficient, it's unknowable. And it got darker. To meet quotas and avoid punishment, workers falsified numbers. Managers lied. Whole industries operated on paper alone and the economy became an illusion. Even the planners didn't believe their own statistics. They couldn't. There was no real metric to check. This is what Ludwig von Mises warned about in 1920. He didn't say socialism would be inefficient. He said it would be impossible. Without market prices for capital goods, you can't do economic calculation. It's not just difficult, it's literally impossible. This wasn't just theory. Lenin himself admitted it. After 3 years of chaos, the new economic policy, NEP, was introduced. Private trade was legalized, markets reappeared and farmers could sell their grain. Small businesses reopened, prices came back. And almost immediately production rebounded. Famine receded and cities were revived because the signals returned. People could once again compare options, assess trade-offs, and act on incentives. The economy began working again, not because of ideology, but because of prices. But this lesson didn't stick. In the 1930s, Stalin reversed the course. Full central planning returned. Markets were suppressed again. This resulted in mass shortages, fake figures, and another wave of famine. Most infamously, the Holodomor. The same pattern repeated across the socialist world. In Mao's China, the Great Leap Forward tried to eliminate private production and local pricing. This resulted in industrial chaos and one of the deadliest famines in human history. Even in Poland, for political reasons, bread was cheaper than wheat. As a result, farmers began feeding bread to pigs because it cost less than the grain it was made from. Think about that. Food meant for people was being used as animal feed, all because price signals were broken. What should have been obvious waste became official policy. Everywhere the price system has been removed or replaced, disarray follows. It's not about bad leadership, it's about a missing mechanism. No one, no matter how smart or sincere, can replace the function of prices. Because prices don't just tell us what things cost, they tell us how to act. They coordinate billions of people who've never met by encoding information about preferences, trade-offs, and resource limits. Without them, we're lost. Imagine trying to plan a dinner for 10 people with no feedback on ingredients, no idea of dietary needs, no awareness of kitchen equipment. Now multiply that by 300 million people. That's a centrally planned economy without prices. That's confusion on a civilizational scale. And it gets worse. Without prices, people stop caring. There's no reward for efficiency, no penalty for waste. Corruption thrives and quality drops. This drop kills initiative. Why work harder if your efforts don't change the outcome? You end up with what economists call soft budget constraints. State-owned enterprises that never go bankrupt, no matter how much they lose. They keep operating, producing useless goods, consuming valuable resources, because no one can say when enough is enough. Meanwhile, innovation stalls. In market economies, a new idea competes. If it works, it profits. If it fails, it disappears. Prices make all the decisions. But in planned economies, new ideas need permission. They must go through bureaucratic channels. They face resistance, delay, and suspicion, so fewer people even try. That's why centrally planned systems stagnate, not just in growth, but in spirit. The drive to improve, to experiment, to solve real problems all disappear, because the feedback loop is broken. And here's the final irony. Even the best central planners end up turning to black markets. In the USSR, in Mao's China, and even in North Korea today, underground markets survive. People trade in secret, using whisper prices and improvising value. Because deep down, even in a command economy, people need signals to survive. When official prices fail, the black market becomes the real economy, not by design, but by necessity. That's the invisible truth. The price system doesn't need to be perfect, but when it's gone, nothing works. This becomes even clearer when you look at the two Koreas. Case of two Koreas. A perfect example of how two different economic policies shape the growth of nations is the case of the two Koreas. Two completely different outcomes were seen in the economic growth of North and South Korea, despite being one people and neighbors on the same peninsula. After World War II, Korea was divided. The North adopted Soviet-style central planning, while the South embraced markets and private property. Both began poor third-world countries, devastated by war. But over the decades, the South soared while the North stagnated. In the 1950s and 60s, North Korea was actually doing better in some metrics. It had inherited most of the industrial infrastructure alongside receiving support from China and the USSR. South Korea, meanwhile, was rural, politically unstable, and dependent on foreign aid. But by the 1970s, the tide had turned. The turning point was the liberalization of trade, encouraged entrepreneurship, and price signals being used to allocate resources. The government played a role, but businesses made decisions based on costs, demand, and market opportunity. Prices guided investment, profits rewarded success, and losses punished mistakes. North Korea, in contrast, doubled down on central planning. 5-year plans dictated production targets. The state controlled prices, wages, and output. The result was misallocation, waste, and dependency on external aid. By the 1990s, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, North Korea plunged into famine and millions of its citizens starved. Today, the contrast is staggering. South Korea is one of the most advanced economies in the world. Its companies, Samsung, Hyundai, and LG, are global giants. Its citizens enjoy high standards of living, access to technology, and political freedom. North Koreans, on the other hand, live under surveillance, scarcity, and repression. Electricity is rationed, food is scarce, housing is assigned, and the economy runs on a mix of forced labor, central dictates, and smuggled goods. Where markets are allowed to exist, they do so in shadows. What made the difference? Prices. Or rather, the absence of them. In South Korea, prices tell entrepreneurs what to produce. They guide supply chains, reflect consumer preferences, and they allow coordination without coercion. In North Korea, officials issue orders. But they lack the knowledge that only markets can provide. They don't know how much steel to allocate to railroads versus factories, They don't know if a new project is worth the investment or not. They guess. They just guess. And they often guess wrong. That's why North Korea builds empty buildings, produces goods no one wants, and exports labor instead of innovation. Without prices, there's no feedback loop. Mistakes persist and needs go unmet. The people know it. That's why underground markets have emerged across the country. Farmers sell produce in secret. Families trade on the black market and prices arise informally, even in a dictatorship, because people need some way to gauge value. And the black market often works better than the official economy. This is because it is driven by price signals. Even under the threat of prison, people prefer it. Because it works. The Tale of Two Koreas is a real-time experiment. One country let prices speak. The other silenced them, and the results speak for themselves. South Korea's GDP per capita is more than 30 times higher than North Korea's. Life expectancy is over a decade longer, and access to food, energy, and education is radically better. It all comes down to coordination. The South coordinates through prices. The North coordinates through commands. One system respects voluntary exchange, while the other imposes collective ignorance. So, when someone says planning beats the market, ask them, why does one Korea glow at night, and the other disappears into darkness? Distorting prices leads to destroying them. In the case of the South American country of Venezuela, the government has been setting price ceilings on food, medicine, and fuel to make them more affordable for years. As fair and compassionate as that sounds, it's actually unleashed chaos. When the state fixed the price of bread below its production cost, bakers stopped baking. When fuel was practically free, people filled tanks to resell gas on the black market. When groceries were capped, supermarket shelves emptied. Consumers rushed to buy, but producers had no reason to keep supplying. This mismatch between high demand and collapsing supply is the inevitable result of broken price signals. Prices are supposed to ration scarce goods and incentivize their replenishment. When you tamper with them, you short-circuit that function. Demand soars, supply vanishes, and the goods disappear. But the damage didn't stop there. Venezuela also printed money to cover its expanding deficits. More money chasing fewer goods caused the Venezuelan bolivier to collapse. Hyperinflation took hold by 2018. Inflation reached 130,000% a year. Prices were rising so fast that menus had to be reprinted daily. Entire paychecks became worthless within hours. In that kind of environment, prices lose all meaning. It's impossible to plan and compare. A doctor might earn less in a month than a taxi driver makes in a day. A carton of eggs costs more than a month's rent. The economy turns irrational. So people adapt by bartering. Trading in US dollars or gold or even cigarettes, anything more stable than the collapsing national currency. Businesses hide their goods or sell them off book. Supermarkets operate with two prices, one for officials and one for real buyers. And the black market flourishes, not because people want to break the law, but because the legal economy has been broken. Where official prices are lies, only informal ones carry truth. The social consequences are brutal. Hospitals go without medicine and families without food. A country sitting on the largest oil reserves in the world gets reduced to importing fuel because its domestic system is so dysfunctional, and its citizens begin immigrating en masse to find greener pastures elsewhere. And it all started with the same mistake, ignoring prices, thinking they were just numbers that could be changed at will. Prices are not just numbers. They're important signals. Distorting them doesn't just disrupt trade, but unravels trust, productivity, and survival. This isn't just true to Venezuela. Price controls have failed everywhere they've been tried, from Roman emperors to French revolutionaries and modern technocrats. The outcome is always the same. Distorting prices breeds shortages, black markets, and misery. Because when you force prices to lie, the economy stops telling the truth.